Welcome everybody. It is 11 o'clock and I want to start our Sunday meeting. Thank you again for being here with us. It's a pleasure to share this time with you. And before we start, I wanted to bring our Gospel at Home initiative here from FSS. So if you haven't implemented Gospel at Home in your home, or if you have and it's been a really long time since you've done it, or if you need any help, please contact us, and we have a team of dedicated volunteers that will guide you through this implementation of Gospel at Home, where it's such a beautiful way of fertilizing that light that we can turn our homes into. So thank you, and I invite you all. Good morning, Carol. Thank you for being here with us, and as always, we invite you to post comments and questions on our platforms, YouTube or Facebook. So let's start with a text from our daily bread, and I'll just open it randomly here. So number 137, entitled Enemies, where Jesus says in Luke chapter 6:34, he says, "Therefore love your enemies." And Emmanuel tells us this affirmation by the Divine Master deserves close consideration everywhere. Of course, this recommendation to love our enemies require a special analysis. Generally speaking, the masses attribute the verb to love only to activities of affection. In order to demonstrate love in worldly terms, people have to use a lot of words and tender attitudes, even though we know that love can shine in a person's heart without any superficial outward display. Although the Father confers on us wearisome and difficult lives on the earth or other worlds, we cannot attribute to him any denial of love. Regarding the Divine Friend's statement, we must think long and hard about it. Where there is strife, there is antagonism, revealing the existence of circumstances where agreement would not be right, if the common good is at stake. When the Master counseled us to love our enemies, he was not suggesting that we go along with those who deliberately steal or destroy, nor was he ordering us to increase the wings of perversity or malicious intent. What he was really suggesting is that we help the cruelest individuals, not with undue approval, but with the sincere and fraternal intention of helping them return to the divine path through patience, reconstructive recourse, or restorative endeavors. More than anything, the Master was concerned with protecting us against the poison of hatred and keeping us from falling into the petty, useless, and disastrous arguments. Therefore, love those who show that they are in conflict with your heart. Support them fraternally with all the possibilities of assistance within your reach, convinced that such a measure will free you from the calamitous duel of evil against evil. So now let us pray, bowing our heads, closing our eyes, taking a deep breath. Taking a deep breath to re-energize, to reunite ourselves with the Lord, ourselves with our Father, and also with our Master, Jesus. And may we begin this communion with Him today, on this blessed Sunday. recognizing all the blessings that He gives us. The birds singing, the water running, the earth holding us solid and uplifted, and the sun shining, bringing us a glimpse of how loving our Father can be. Jesus, in all your wisdom, in all your greatness, in all your teachings, may we here today be able to understand a little bit more about what you taught us about shyness, to help us understand a little bit more about our own selves, and to realize that we carry enemies within ourselves, and just like Emmanuel suggested, that we are able to love ourselves unconditionally. So be it. Hi Sonia, good to see you here today. So we will talk about shyness today, and the question that we're asking is, my shyness hindering my self-love? And this comes dear to me, talking about shyness. If some of you know, you might understand. And I'm happy to be able to share a little bit about shyness and how it has helped me quite a bit, learning about it to transform it. So the main text that we'll be talking about today comes from a book called Love, Unbeatable Love by Joana Genges, through the medium Givaldo Pereira Franco. And but we're also basing our story here that we're telling from books from Emmanuel through the medium Francisco Cândido Xavier, called Study and Live, Words of Eternal Life, Vine of Light, and Thought and Life. Also utilizing a few questions from the Spirit book and from Allan Kardec. And towards the end, we'll be talking about virtues and transforming our shyness. And for that, we'll utilize a few passages from Lírio de Cerqueira Filho from the Spiritist Federation of the state of Mato Grosso in Brazil, on his talks about spiritual healing of fear, of phobias, and so on. So the goal is to deconstruct shyness, be able to understand what it is, why do we have it, what is it trying to do, so we can from then embark on this journey of transforming it. So we'll start with a few reflections, and the first question, I invite you to close your eyes if you want to. And the first question is shyness an egoic feeling? Or is shyness a virtue? What do we think it is? If shyness is an egoic feeling, what is it trying to hide? What is shyness trying to hide? And if you don't understand that question, you will soon. The third one is how do I feel about my shyness? Is it something that I like about myself? Is it something that I don't like about myself? And if it's something that I don't like about myself, is shyness hindering my ability to love myself? And the last one is, what can I do about it? If I realize I have it, if I realize I want to transform it, what can I do about it? And that's how we'll end our talk today here. But basically, the first thing, right, it starts by knowing about it, getting to know about it, reading about it, understanding it. And hopefully this is what we'll be able to do here a little bit. And starting with a question from the Spirit's book, number 932, that Kardec asks the spirits, why do the wicked of this world usually exert a great influence over the good, or a greater influence over the good. Why is that the evil, the wicked, have so much power over the good, or they prevail over the good? And the Spirit's answer to Kardec, because the good are not assertive. The wicked are scheming and daring, whereas the good are timid. The moment they want to do, the latter will prevail. So here we're seeing the word timid, or in other words, shyness, in the Spirit's book, with the sense that the Spirits are telling us that the good is there, and the good can prevail if it so chooses. But because of our shyness, because we're timid, if you will, that hinder us from acting on this good, from exposing this good, from showing this good. And in turn, we let the evil or the wicked prevail. So this can be a great analogy to our own selves, right? If we're trying to talk about hindrance here, and how shyness can prevent our good from being the driver, from prevailing within our lives. We are good. We are essentially good beings. We were created an image of God. So we are good in essence, but our shyness, us being timid, is what can hinder us from showing it, from acting upon this good. And when we don't do good, in turn, we're letting the evil prevail. So that is just an introduction from the Spirit's book, talking about shyness and how it can be a hindrance to the good, as we can see in the world. If you do have any problems with the sound, just post a comment on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll get it fixed up. So, starting with the book "Love, Unbeatable Love" by Joana de Angelis. That's the cover on the corner there. So this will be the backbone of our talk today. We'll be going back and forth to this text in the book "Love, Unbeatable Love," entitled "Shyness." In Portuguese, timidez. So, she says that shyness can present itself as a normal psychological phenomenon when it comes to care in the face of confrontations that require consideration, that require balance, that require decision. So we're starting with good. We're starting with the good here, which is what Joana brings us about the idea of the balanced shyness. As you'll see here today, it's always a spectrum. We have the balanced version of something, but it's always talking about the good and being able to express and to transform our immortal spirit. That's the balanced way. Then we always have our extremes that just push us away from our essential being, and we'll see them on all spectrums today, but we wanted to start with the balanced shyness. So it's not all bad, right? When we have shyness in a balanced way, it actually can help us a lot, especially on these situations like Joana is telling us here. When we're faced with confrontation, being able to act with calmness, with consideration, with balance. It helps us make a better decision. Instead of acting with impulse, we're able to breathe. We're able to think about it and make an educated decision. She's saying that one could even classify shyness as a mechanism of prudence, providing reflection necessary for the adoption of the correct conduct, which is what we talked about. So a balanced shyness can, for sure, provide us with good outcomes. The thing is, usually we're trying to reach that balance, but we're usually on either extremes. And so the unbalanced shyness, so when we're over onto this side, if you will, it's characterized as an almost exaggerated fear. And especially in the face of unforeseen circumstances, when I don't know what's going to happen, or when I'm faced with something that I didn't expect, right, I instantly feel fear. And this fear is very exacerbated. It takes over. And it takes over in a way that you start expressing physical things that a lot of times you think you have no control over, such as producing a lot of sweating, heart palpitations, peripheral collapses of extremities. You start shaking a lot, and it becomes pathological, right? And at one point, when it becomes so intense, it certainly requires some psychological therapy. So she's telling us how an extreme of shyness can lead us to this exaggerated fear, especially when we're faced with something that we didn't expect, right? When we're put on the spot, for example, and then we can see all these physical things come up, basically. And also, there's another aspect of shyness, which is called the hidden pride. And Joanna brings us this idea that was new to me when I first read this text a while ago. She says that the shy individual in some way has an exacerbated pride that leads to the construction of wrong behavior. So this to me was something new when I read this. And so the shy individual is actually, they're not humble as they might look. In a way, they're simply hiding, they're simply masking a pride, a very exacerbated pride, actually. But they do sometimes a pretty good job at masking it, at hiding it. And that leads to wrong behaviors. She says that he unconsciously assumes that by not exposing himself, he protects his conflicting reality, preventing himself and others from making a profound identification of his self. So this is how pride can be very detrimental for us. When Jonah says that he, we're using he and him on the talk because that's how it is in the book, but it means him, her, basically every individual. So she says that he unconsciously assumes that by not exposing himself, so not exposing who they are, this pride that we are hiding within ourselves is a way of not exposing myself and protecting any conflicts that I have within from other people from seeing it. I don't want to expose whatever conflict I have within myself because of this exacerbated pride. I think I'm better than others, so I don't need to show them who I am. And this leads to something that she talks to us on this last sentence, which is very important to what we're talking about here today. Preventing himself and others from making a profound identification of his self. So not only when this pride, right, I'm hiding myself from others, I'm not expressing and exposing my reality to others. What I'm doing is not only preventing others from seeing me, but I'm also preventing my own self from diving deep, from seeing all my bad inclinations, from seeing all my ego, from seeing all the things that I might not be proud of. Right? So it also prevents us from getting to know our own self. And when we talk about pride, just to illustrate a little bit about pride, we can go to the Spirit's book, question 785. This is the section of the Spirit's book that's talking about the law of progress. And Kardec asks, what is the greatest obstacle to progress? The Spirit's answer, pride and selfishness. And the Spirits are referring to moral progress, not intellectual progress, because intellectual progress is always occurring. We're always finding new things. We're always learning more about the world, about humans, and developing new technology. So the intellectual progress happens. But the spirits are referring to moral progress, and how pride, it's something that stops that progress. One of the reasons why is this one that we just talked about. It's how pride prevents us from seeing who we truly are. Pride becomes a blindness, right? We become blind to who we truly are, to everything that we're doing. And because we can't see who we are, we can't transform who we are. We can't improve ourselves if we don't know who we are, if we don't practice our self-awareness. And that is one of the main reasons why we pose a hindrance to progress. Because by not understanding who we are, by not transforming ourselves because of pride, we're hindering our own progress, and in turn, the progress of our world. So that was question 785. There's also another question from the Spirit's book that also illustrates pride. And this is question 9 from the Spirit's book. So it's one of the very first questions when the Spirit's book is addressing God. And God as the first cause of everything. And question 9 is when Kardec is posing a sequence of questions to in a logical way, prove God's existence. So in question 9, he asks, where may we see in the first cause, the supreme intelligence, superior to all other intelligences? So what is he trying to say here? Sounds a little complicated. So he's saying that where can we see God's intelligence? If we say that, like in the first question of the Spirit's book, or in the first answer, God as being the first cause of everything, where can I see the intelligence? Where can I see the supreme intelligence of God? And then the answer that the Spirits give us is, you have a proverb that says that. The workman is known by his work. So look at the work and you will find the workman. So basically, what the Spirits are telling us here is that the best way for us to know how intelligent is someone is to look at their work, right? If you want to see how talented a painter is, an artist is, we will look at their paintings, right? So, and by looking at their paintings, we can know how intelligent that painter is. So this is what the proverb is saying, is for us to see how intelligent, how this supreme intelligence of God exists, let's look at the work of God, which is us, right? Which is basically everything on earth. So by looking at everything basically on earth, we can identify how intelligent he is. The focus for this question is this. The Spirits then go to say that pride is what creates disbelief. So again, this little word, so small, is what creates disbelief. So when we look at shyness being a hidden pride, that can cultivate a disbelief. A disbelief in God, and in turn, an even greater disbelief in our own selves. And as we'll see, this disbelief in our own selves can be very detrimental, as we'll talk about today. So I just wanted to bring this sentence here, how it's very important. Question 9 of the Spirit's book. Pride is what creates disbelief. And then Joanna goes back to I guess to put these two together, pride and fear, like we talked about. She says that taking refuge in shyness he disguises his pride and fear of being identified in his inability to act safely, protecting himself from inconveniences that inevitably surprise him. Right? So in this shyness, in this cover that we put on ourselves, trying to protect us from exposing ourselves from things that eventually will come. Right? Eventually, through God's providence, we will be exposed to something where we will have to face it. So it is a matter of time. And so in this refuge, in this pseudo-refuge, per se, that we think shyness can provide us, is us hiding our pride and our fear. So we have our pride, which is that ego that we're trying to hide. And as we talked about, pride gives us disbelief. Pride prevents our moral progress. And in turn, pride will make us, again, not believe in ourselves. When we don't believe in ourselves, that generates insecurities. Insecurities, what does that generate? Fear. So you can see how one leads to the other. And the fear and the pride, right? It's what is paralyzing us. It's what's hindering us from improving, or hindering us from loving ourselves, which is the main question of this talk. So when we're talking about fear, since we've talked about pride a little bit, we went to the Spiritist literature to find some things about pride. Now we'll go and find some things about fear. And to do that, we'll utilize a passage from Paul in his second letter to Timothy, chapter 1, when he said, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." Right? And it's, I really like bringing Paul into our talks, because Paul didn't write something that he heard, that somebody told him about it, and he heard it's good. What he said has meaning because he lived it. He experienced it. So he is speaking from experience. So he's saying that God gave us the spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. And then when we go into the Spiritist literature and we look at a book called Words of Eternal Life from Emmanuel, same from Our Daily Bread, and another one is Living Spring, right? These are all books from Emmanuel through the medium Francisco Cândido Xavier. So in this book, Words of Eternal Life, chapter 84, called Divine Gifts, Emmanuel tells us that the Divine Father has largely given us the strength of courage, love, and self-control. Thus, we are all endowed with resources to develop to infinity the divine gifts of strength that is love. Right? Isn't that beautiful? We'll go through quite a few snippets of these texts, and Emmanuel so beautifully touches us, touches our hearts when he's telling us that our Father has given us strength of courage, love, and self-control, which means that we are endowed, which means we have the resources that we need to develop to our infinity our divine gifts. So develop all this gift, all these gifts that God has given us, we have the strength to develop them, which are all love. He says, "Does not lose yourself, therefore, in the disturbing or destructive ideas of fear." Right? So Emmanuel here is telling us how fear can be very destructive and very disturbing, especially for our own selves. Right? When we fear, we don't think we're good enough. We don't think we are capable of developing these gifts that God has given us. He says, use the strength of courage, love, and self-control, right? Which were talents that the Lord, that the Father has invested in favor of our own improvement. So the Father has given us the courage, the love, and the self-control as tools to our own self-improvement. And in doing that, this is beautiful, like he says, in doing that, you will go forward on earth and beyond with the light of the heart and the peace of the conscience. The light of the heart and the peace of the conscience, this is when we start to utilize all these divine gifts that God has given us to improve our own selves. In other words, this is when we start to develop our virtues with the divine laws, with the gifts that God has given us. And on another, has given us. And going a little bit further, or going back to the text from Joanna, when she's talking about the meaning of self-worth, and this is where shyness can become a little bit more deep, if you will, a little bit more it starts to bring us to a movement of dislove or lack of self-love. This is where we start to distance ourselves quite a bit from us. She says that at other times, he underestimates himself and everything that could induce him to psychological growth, to learning, to a good social relationship, and it becomes a burden. Considering that the questions he could ask, the contacts he should maintain are not important. So in this point is where she says here, we start to underestimate things. We start to underestimate ourselves. And when we start to underestimate ourselves, we start to prevent, again, our self-growth. Right? So we stop learning. We stop interact socially. We don't see the value anymore of learning. We don't see the value of social relationships, of our contacts, of being curious, of asking questions, of wanting to improve. Right? So this is where we start to distance ourselves from us. And more importantly, she says, in his distorted psychological view, what concerns him is not important. Having the impression that nobody's interested in him, that his questions are worthless, being himself uninteresting and meaningless to the social group. Shyness hides it, making it absent even when facing others. So here we're getting a little deeper now, because as she describes here, this psychological idea of self-demeanor, of thinking that we are not worth it, seeing that we are not important, seeing that, again, we're worthless, that we are not interesting to other people. Right? What's the point of being part of a social group if I'm not interesting? Right? If I can't provide anything of value to the social group, and so on and so forth. So you can see how this fear, how this insecurity, how this shyness will eventually drive us to this. And in this stage here, that's when we start to isolate. Right? We start to isolate from people, we start to isolate from social groups, because we think we are not important. We're not worthy of anything. So, this is very different than solitude. This isolation is different than solitude. A lot of times isolation is confused with solitude, where solitude is something that Jesus would do at night. He'd be with himself, pray, re-energize, recollect his thoughts, and it's something that we are invited to do quite often. St. Augustine asks us, or invites us to do this in question 909 from the Spirit's book. And this is solitude, with the sense of re-energizing, the sense of getting ourselves in communion with God, so then we can later go back to action, if you will. Whereas isolation again, this is a very deep lack of self-worth, or a very exacerbated pride, where I think I'm so much better than everybody else that I don't need anybody else, right? But again, that's just masking a very huge insecurity, a very big lack of self-worth, right? And this can lead to depression. This can lead eventually to suicide. And so this is the part of shyness that is a little deeper. And what brings us hope is, like we said before, is the courage, is the love, is the strength that God has created us with. We know we have this strength. We know we have this courage within ourselves. We know we can do it. Right? We are sons and daughters of God. We have this potential within us. And a lot of times we bring an idea from the book Study and Live in the chapter called Courage, again by Emmanuel. A lot of times we see shyness. A lot of times we try to justify our shyness because we think we're being humble. But, let's focus on the top there. A lot of times we think we want to embrace or want to justify our shyness because we think shyness is the same as humility. And then Emmanuel tells us that shyness is not humility. So the idea of hiding ourselves within shyness because we think we're being humble, that is not the case. In turn, in the book Thought and Life, entitled Humility, chapter 24, Emmanuel says that humility is a recognition of our smallness before the universe. So it's recognizing how small we are in front of the universe. Above all, it is independence, inner freedom that is born from the depths of the Spirit, supporting its permanent renewal for good. So when we are in that isolation state, understanding, right, that above all, inner freedom, we're born with it. We're born with independence. God has given us the strength to be self-sufficient in a way that we are good enough, that we are worthy of our own work, right? Supporting our permanent renewal for good. Remembering that at this stage in life, here on earth, we are social beings. We are driven by the law of society, trying to only help ourselves with us in isolation. That is realizing that we don't need help. Again, that goes against, if you will, with the law of society, with understanding that we are social beings, that we rely on others to improve. And so that's why this idea of isolation can be very blinding. And he says that to cultivate, it is to move forward without being caught. It is to project the best of oneself on the paths of the world. It is to forget all evil and joyfully start the task of love every day. Right? Knowing that we can cultivate and we can move forward without being caught. Project the best of ourselves on the paths of this world. So these are words from Emmanuel that talks about humility, that talks about courage. And Jonah, going back to what Jonah says about shyness, she says that it muffles spontaneity and creativity. When she's telling us that shyness is a terrible executioner for imprisoning spontaneity, which prevents the patient from living in freedom, from exteriorizing in a natural way, from facing difficulties with internal harmony, understanding that every challenging situation requires reflection and care. So that was a mouthful. So let's dissect this a little bit. So shyness is a terrible executioner. So basically, shyness can be a killer. Shyness can muffle, right? And imprisons spontaneity, imprisons creativity, right? This lack of self-worth, this idea of that I'm not good enough, that I can't do it. It prevents us from being creative, from being spontaneous. And it prevents the patient from living in freedom, from exteriorizing in a natural way. Right? Exteriorizing in a natural way meaning socializing with other people, understanding that we're part of a society and we can leverage from mutual benefits. And then another important part that she says here is from facing difficulties with an internal harmony. Right? So this shyness that we bring about, this idea of trying to run away from conflicts, is just trying to put off our confrontations and put off difficult situations. Because in turn we know that facing difficulties with internal harmony is something that we're not very good at. And then she tells us that a healthy life is also characterized by occurrence of fears, when there are problems that deserve special attention. So now she's starting to bring us back to that balance, when she's saying that a healthy life is also characterized by occurrence of fear. So it's not like we're talking about not having fear at all. There is a place for fear. There is a balanced fear, especially when we're dealing with difficult situations that deserve special attention. Right? If the most, I guess, rudimentary example that we can think of, if you're being chased by something that might kill you, if you're being chased by an animal or a bear, you will fear it and you will run for your life. Right? So fear in its place is very practical, is very good, but again, in the right place, in the right balance. And then, so like again, going back to that balanced shyness that we're talking about, as everyone wants to achieve their goals, which are the existential sense to which we long for, the careful and timid way, neither aggressive nor hasty, expresses an opportune mechanism to preserve intimacy, preserve reality, and the evolution process. So, again, shyness does have a place. There is a balanced way of seeing this, right? We all want to achieve our goals. We all want to fulfill our existential sense. We all want to perform the things that we so long for, that we desire, and doing so in a careful and in a timid way, in a balanced timid way, neither aggressive nor hasty, right? That can become a very opportune mechanism, a very beneficial mechanism for us to preserve our intimacy, to face reality, and to evolve. So again, there is a balanced version of it. And now we're going to the other side. So we started by talking about the balanced, then we went on to the one side of shyness, right? The hidden pride, the fear, and so on and so forth. We talked a little bit again about the balance, and now we're going to the other side. So we can see, as we usually talk here about in our Spiritist center, the pendulum, right? When we're going to the both sides of the ego. One is the hiding, the masks, where we're trying to hide things. The other one is where we're given a lot of evidence to it, where we're blindly giving flow to it, if you will, which would be what we're talking about now, the other side of the pendulum. So the absence of shyness does not mean perfect health. The absence of shyness does not mean presence of full psychological health, because if we go to the other extreme, such as noisy extroversion, excessive communicability, is also hiding a conflict feeling, diverting attention from his reality to his appearance. Right? So here we have those of us who are very extroverted, very noisy, talk a lot to an extreme, right? In the sense that we're trying to, with our words, with our gestures, with our extroversion, try to hide our own reality within. She says that if we observe such conduct, you will soon notice a great excitement and concern to please, to attract attention, to become the center of interest for everyone. Right? So the other extreme is also not beneficial. Right? Also trying to not work within and worry and portray an image that is not really true. And the reason why we brought the pendulum, it's because we usually go from one to the other, from one to the other. And that's okay when we're looking at getting closer and closer to the center. Right? We move from one to the other, but in every time we move from one to the other, if we're trying to reach that balance, right, eventually we'll get there. So a lot of times when I'm deep in shyness, because of this idea of insecurity, of lack of self-worth, I can become very needy of affection. I can become needy of love. So in a movement of rebellion, I go to the other extreme, and I want to instantly become the center of attention because I'm lacking that love, and I'm trying to get love from others to fulfill a need that I have. Once I got some of it, then I might come back and then stay in the shyness again. So as you can see, it can be a pendulum, and as long as we're consciously going from one to the other and trying to get closer to the middle ground, to the balance, we are evolving. And the hope, Joanna ends this text by telling us that shyness can also be worked on through honest self-analysis, so that the patient should consider himself equal to others as he really is, neither better nor worse, just different. Right? So again, this is really important. Understanding that shyness is an egoic feeling, and with any egotistical feeling, we can't transform that into a virtue, right? So that can only be done with self-analysis, honest self-analysis, so that we can consider ourselves neither better or worse than others, right? We are the same. At the same time, we are different because we were raised in different families. We have different circumstantial aspects of the world, but we also have different past lives, things that we bring from our past. So understanding that we're not better or worse than others, and that we're the same in our differences, if that makes sense. In addition, he must bear in mind that he is a creditor of respect and affection, like all other people who has values, perhaps not yet expressed, and therefore deserves to enjoy the rights that life grants him and must defend. So this is a beautiful passage about hope, right? It's understanding that we are creditors of respect and affection. We are worthy of respect. We are worthy of affection, starting within our own selves, right? We are worthy of our own respect, of respecting ourselves for who we are today, right? With all the good and the bad. We are worthy of our own affection. We are worthy of welcoming everything that we are. And also, we are worthy of respect and affection from others. And we do have values like Shwana says here. So it's a beautiful message of hope. And in any movement to develop, to transform, it's always good to talk about faith. And in the book Thought and Life, chapter 6, entitled Faith, there are quite a few passages, again, a book from Emmanuel, that talks about faith. He says that we cannot achieve any good without a positive attitude of confidence. He says, however, how do we express faith? This is a question asked by many. And he says that faith has no definition in the ordinary vocabulary. He says, it is the strength that is born with the soul itself, instinctive certainty in the wisdom of God, that is the wisdom of life itself. And if you follow FSS, if you follow our talks, every time we talk about faith, we talk about the convicted faith, which is the faith on, it's based on a triangle or a triad. It's the faith in myself, it's the faith in life, and it's the faith in God. And we can see that in Emmanuel's words here when he told us the faith is the strength that's born within us, so it's the faith within our souls, within ourselves. It is the faith in the wisdom of God, and it is the faith in life. So again, that encapsulates our concept of faith. And Emmanuel brings this also interesting passage where he says, the simple meal for many, a spontaneous act of faith. Feeding he trusts the abdominal viscera he doesn't see. So here is an idea of faith. When we eat, when we put something in our mouths, we have complete faith that our body is going to digest it, that our body is going to extract the nutrients and transform it into an energy. We have complete faith of that, right? We don't even think about it as much. So we have faith in a physical thing that God has created, and it is a physical thing. And He can do wonders with the food that we put in our mouths. Now, can you imagine, if you just stop to imagine, that something that God created that is physical, it is our matter, can do something so impressive, such as digestion. And He can do it so beautifully, He can do it so many times. Can we imagine the potential of our immortal spirit if we have the faith that we can do it? If we have the faith that we have a divine potential within us because God created us, can you imagine the things that we can do, the good that we can do? So faith, again, is truly what could be the fuel to our own self-transformation. He says that eternal good is the same light for all, but by concentrating its strength on us through positive, intimate security, we will certainly more effectively portray glory. So Emmanuel is telling us here that everybody's exposed to the same eternal good, the same divine light, if you will. What changes is not the amount of light that we receive, but is the amount of light that we're able to absorb, and through our positive security, through our own self-confidence, take that light within us and transform it into a better immortal spirit, portraying the glory of God within us. Beautiful, right? And so now we're entering the last portion of our talk, talking about spiritual healing of fear. And this is what we based our talk from All'Idizio che la Figlio. And he brings us very important ideas, and I might go a few minutes over. So he says that the lack of self-love, faith in God, in life, and in us, right, makes us feel abandoned, disconnected from the Creator. We begin to develop a pathological fear. So again, just like Emmanuel told us, the faith, that convicted faith, is the faith in myself, in life, and in God. And then he says, although it might seem paradoxical, when the Spirit recognizes its fragility, it creates strength. So that can be a little paradoxical, right? Let's stop here. By recognizing its fragility, it creates strength. In psychology, especially in social work, there's been a lot of talks about vulnerability these days, right? This could fit in this. Is when we can find ourselves vulnerable, we can find ourselves fragile, recognizing our fragility, recognizing our vulnerability. In that, we can find strength. Why? Because that awareness brings us how small we are compared to God, and in doing so, we can surrender ourselves to the divine power. That reminds me of something that Paul told the Galatians. When he was completely surrendered to God, he was able to truly say, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. When we recognize our fragility and surrender to the divine powers of God, we can utilize his power better. And also in the Philippians, again, Paul, he said, I can do everything in him who strengthens me. Right? So in that fragility, surrendering ourselves to him, we can find the true strength that we need to transform. The leader also says that to have existential security, right? So to transform our insecurity. To have existential security is to trust that we are creatures in the process of evolution, apprentices of life protected by a great loving energy. We talked about this in my last talk, when we say we're not thrown into the universe, experiencing a meaningless life. We have a destination of the light, of the beautiful, of the good, of harmony, of balance, of happiness. We are guided by a divine and loving energy. We are divine creatures with an existential purpose, and we will be realized when we are in true with the purity of purposes. So when we're true to ourselves, when we're true to our mission, to our purpose, right? Through this surrender to God, we can realize all our potential. We can realize all our transformation. And when we look at, Lydia talks about the idea of self-welcoming to transform our shyness, to transform our fear. And he says that involves the acceptance, the welcoming, the experimentation, and the knowledge. In a movement just like this mother is doing with this child, right? Starting with this acceptance, accepting my shyness, accepting that I still have it within me, and also understanding that I can transform it. The second being this welcoming, right? Welcoming the shyness and understanding that I have it because of my past decisions, because of my past options and actions, and also with the idea that a lot of times this shyness can be an improved version of what it was before, right? So it can be that I've already progressed, right? Knowing that this shyness can be a tool that I will know how to transform it into light, right? Trying to foster this shyness as a tool for evolvement, for transformation. And then experimenting. And this is where Alito says that I experience the pleasure and joy recognizing that I'm making efforts to sublimate shyness in myself, developing confidence and the courage of the convicted faith. So he's saying here that as we start to experiment with shyness, we start to feel joy, we start to feel pleasure by utilizing our own efforts to transform it. And that brings us to the knowledge. So when we know what causes shyness, when we know what it is, and when we know that we're making the efforts to transform it, we can feel happiness. It doesn't mean that our shyness is completely transformed. No, I still have it. but just the glimpses and the small steps that I take to transform it, that brings me happiness. That brings me an existential joy. And it propels me to keep going, knowing that I can, knowing that I will. And I want to end with this idea that we are in a couple months of Thanksgiving. And this idea when Paul told in his first letter to the Thessalonians, when he said, "In everything give thanks." So now a reflection is, can I give thanks to my shyness? Do I see my shyness as an opportunity of me to getting to know myself a little better and try to transform it? Try to see that as an opportunity. Can I give thanks in everything? And then understanding what Jesus told us in John when he said, very truly, I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works that I have been doing, and they will do so much more. When we can surrender to this divine power, when we can follow everything that He's taught us, we can do everything that He did and so much more. We can, in an act of loving kindness towards ourselves, developing that self-love, we can slowly transform that shyness into courage, into love, into action, into self-love. Because after all, like Paul said to the Corinthians, if I didn't have love, I would be nothing. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Sonia, for being here today. And if you see this picture, you probably understand what it is. And like Paul said, if I didn't have love, I would be nothing. So hopefully this has, for all of us, motivated us to give thanks to everything, to realize our power within our surrender to the divine power, so we can develop love, our divine force. So thank you all, and if there are any comments or questions, we can end in prayer. So let us close our eyes now. In a moment of communion with God, in a moment where we can truly surrender ourselves to God, finding our own fragility, but also understanding that His divine providence is there to help us, trusting that His love, His light, can only propel us to the good when we surrender. God, help us find our strength in our own fragility. Help us find love within us. Help us transform our own internal enemies into our own internal loving warriors of peace. May you bless us today, forever and ever, and may we know how to utilize your blessings towards love. So be it. Thank you all for coming, and tomorrow we're back at 7 o'clock for a talk in Portuguese, and we will see you then. Thank you.